Hello and welcome to this special edition of Vantage. We are coming to you from Dubai, a city that is synonymous with progress and wealth. But many decades ago, that was not the case. The fate of this city and this country changed in 1958. That's when the UAE discovered oil. All the prosperity here is built on that discovery, on the liquid gold rush of the 20th century. Of course, along with it came climate change. Big oil is considered one of the biggest factors leading to climate change, which is what makes this week so important. Because this week, the United Arab Emirates is hosting COP28, the annual United Nations Summit on Climate Action. Some 70,000 delegates are attending. Heads of governments, including Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India, will be coming here. Their mission is to thrash out an agreement to safeguard our future and planet. The UAE hosting COP may seem like an irony to you, but frankly, it's also the need of the hour. Climate action requires big oil to play its part. What the UAE does this week could be a template for all oil companies and nations. We'll be tracking all the COP28 updates from here, also bringing you all the news from across the world. But first, let's look at the headlines tonight. Israel-Hamas truce enters the fourth and final day. Will it be extended? Reports say Hamas is keen, but will Israel agree? 39 Israeli hostages and 117 Palestinian prisoners have been released so far. 19 foreign nationals have also been freed from Gaza. The new Maldivian president picks Turkey over India as his first official trip abroad. It's a break from tradition as Mohammad Muizzu looks to reduce dependence on New Delhi. He defeated the pro-India candidate in the presidential elections held in September. Sierra Leone government says it's in full control and declares a national curfew. This comes after a military armory was attacked in the capital on Sunday. It led to armed clashes. The West African country has been going through a political crisis since the elections in June. Dutch coalition talks in chaos. Van Strien, the man tasked with overseeing the negotiations, has resigned. The senator from Geert Wilders' party was to begin formal talks today. The anti-Islam, anti-immigrant and anti-EU Wilders is struggling to build a coalition government. We begin with the story we started tracking last week. China's mystery illness. It is spreading across the country. Thousands of people are hospitalized. The World Health Organization is concerned. Beijing says there is nothing to worry about. If all of this sounds familiar, it's because we've been through something like this before. The last time there was news of a mystery illness from China, it turned out to be the Wuhan virus. Millions died and the world shut down. So, of course, there is some alarm this time. But what is this disease and how is it spreading so rapidly? In the last few weeks, China has witnessed a spike in respiratory illnesses, a mysterious pneumonia-like disease. It was first reported on the 13th of November. This was by China's National Health Commission. The disease has led to a spike in hospitalizations across the country. There is a long wait at many hospitals. And the worst hit this time are children. But some adults have also been impacted. On the 23rd of November, the WHO raised an alarm. It asked China for more information. So Beijing has released more details. It says there is no mystery pathogen this time. Instead, there is a mix of pathogens driving this surge. And what are these respiratory pathogens? There is mycoplasma. It causes what is called the walking pneumonia. Basically, your chest X-ray could look worse than you are. Then there is influenza. There are adenoviruses and RSV, which is respiratory syncytial virus.
Our monitoring data shows that the lately infectious respiratory illnesses are dominantly influenza with additional cases caused by rhinoviruses, mycoplasma, pneumonia, respiratory syncytial virus and adenovirus. Our analysis shows that the continued upsurge in the acute respiratory illnesses reported recently in our country is incurred by several respiratory pathogens.
I know it sounds complicated, but here's what Beijing is basically trying to say. These are all known pathogens. There is nothing new, so there is nothing to worry about. This illness is not being caused by a novel virus like the one that came out of Wuhan. In an ideal world, this should calm fears. But given China's record, it's doing the opposite. And even if this is not a new virus, it is overwhelming China. The scenes look scary. The biggest hotspots are in the northern part of the country. Liaoning and Beijing are the worst affected. Thousands of people are hospitalized, thousands more are waiting. Hospitals have run out of room for them. Medical facilities are under strain. In Tianjin, for instance, children's hospitals are operating around the clock. And one of them is dealing with more than 13,000 new cases a day. 13,000 cases per day. Another hospital is merging departments. This is to make more room for incoming patients.
Efforts should be made to open more relevant clinics, expand the treatment areas, extend the working hours properly, enhance the supply of drugs, give play to the role of traditional Chinese medicine, improve the treatment capacity, and standardize diagnosis and treatment to the full, and leverage the role of internet hospital and grassroots medical institutions so as to make it convenient for people to seek medical treatment nearby.
So the situation is bad and it's likely to get worse. And I'm not the one saying this, China is. Beijing is calling it, and I'm quoting, an immunity debt. What does that mean? For the last few winters, China was under lockdown. This is the first winter after they lifted the pandemic restrictions, after the end of zero COVID. Those restrictions kept them away from illnesses, but now they're being exposed, and this is contributing to the surge. Beijing says it will peak in winter and could continue till spring, which brings us to the big question. Should you be worried? India says it is monitoring the situation and the risk of outbreak is low. But hospitals and facilities are reviewing preparedness. And it is important to remain vigilant. The world must demand detailed updates from China and regular follow-ups by the World Health Organization. Also be on the lookout for undiagnosed clusters. We cannot afford a repeat of the last time. Now to the US, where Khalistanis are targeting India and its representatives. It's unfortunate and shameful, given that today is Guru Nanak Jayanti, also known as Gurpurab, one of the holiest days in Sikhism, a celebration of the birth of the first Sikh Guru. You would think that on such a joyous and solemn occasion, people would be respectful and they would maintain decorum. But that does not hold true for Khalistanis. Nothing, it seems, is sacred for them. And they proved that again last night by taking their frustration out on a senior Indian diplomat. This is India's ambassador to the United States, Taranjeet Singh Sandhu. On Sunday, he was invited to a Gurudwara in Hicksville, New York. He gave a speech to mark the holy occasion of Guru Nanak Jayanti, and he also honored the Sikh community of Afghanistan.
The Afghan Sikhs have shown in actual practice how adversity should be faced. They faced the worst kind of adversity, but they protected their religion in its original form.
Ambassador Sandhu was later felicitated by the Sikh community of New York for his years of service, for his achievements, and for his unwavering dedication to India. You can see the respect and pride that the Sikh community feels. But sadly, these were not the only events that took place yesterday. Some Khalistan supporters made their way into the event and they tried to ruin the occasion by heckling Ambassador Sandhu. Take a look at this.
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹਰਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਨਿੱਜਰ ਦੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਾਤਲ ਹੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਗੁਰਪਤਵੰਤ ਪੰਨੂ ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹਮਲਾ ਕਰਵਾਉਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹਮਲੇ ਕਰਾਉਂਦੇ ਆ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਨਵੈਸੀ ਦੇ ਕਾਤਲ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਨਵੈਸ ਹਰਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਨਿੱਜਰ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਤਲ ਕਰਵਾਇਆ ਹਰਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਨਿੱਜਰ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਾਤਲ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਕਾਤਲ ਆ
They were blaming Ambassador Sandhu for the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Khalistani terrorist. They also accused India of planning to kill Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, again a Khalistani terrorist who openly threatens attacks against India. Now, Nijjar, as you would know, was based out of Canada. He was killed in the month of June this year, and the Canadian government blamed India for that killing. They said India was involved in his death. It was a serious charge without a shred of evidence. It's been more than 2 months. Canada is yet to give proof. But its accusations triggered a diplomatic spat, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's policy against India has spawned venom, like you just saw. Thankfully, these were just a handful of Khalistanis at the New York Gurudwara, and they were promptly thrown out after the heckling. Reports say one of them was outside the Gurudwara, waving a Khalistan flag. Now, this cannot be dismissed as a small incident. It shows how Indians, even top-ranking diplomats, are at risk in Western countries that give a safe haven to Khalistanis. What if more of them had converged on Ambassador Sandhu? And India has raised this issue repeatedly, urged its partners in the West to not appease Khalistanis. Canada is an extreme case where the Prime Minister has openly taken an anti-India position, but these concerns are not limited to Canada. It's the same in the United States, in the UK and Australia as well. India has been issuing warnings about the danger these separatists pose. But are they paying heed? Ambassador Sandhu had a close shave. Look at how close the separatists got to him. This incident could have been far worse. Khalistanis have attacked India's embassies and missions in the past few months. They've vandalized Hindu temples, indulged in anti-India hate speech, made open threats, and got away with everything. Yesterday's incident shows even their own places of worship are not sacred, nor are holy days. And this is classic Western hypocrisy at play, where they value Khalistani votes more than Indian lives. And to justify it, they use the freedom of expression argument. Our next story is about two truths. One, our planet is careening towards a climate catastrophe. And two, our governments are not doing enough to prevent this crisis. But all hope is not lost. Thanks to an acronym, the much-awaited COP28, the most important climate conference of the year. This is an annual international climate summit convened by the United Nations. And this year, it will be held here in Dubai, from November 30th to December 12th. Tens of thousands of people will be attending it, from government officials and business leaders to youth advocates, even leaders of fossil fuel companies. So obviously, we are here too to bring you all the updates. We'll answer all your questions. What does COP28 stand for? Who is attending the conference? What's on the agenda? What are the expectations? But before all of that, let's go back about 30 years. In 1992, more than 150 countries signed a UN treaty. They decided to limit the alarming rise of pollution. In 1995, the parties to that agreement held their first conference. This was the Conference of Parties, or the first COP. Since then, member states convene almost every year to talk about coping with climate change. So far, one conference stands out. The COP21, it was held in 2015. More than 190 countries signed an agreement. We know it as the Paris Agreement. It was to limit global warming below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably 1.5 degrees. Now, this is a threshold beyond which climate change will get severe, and it will be much harder for humans to cope. Spoiler alert, the planet has already warmed by 1.2 degrees Celsius, and this makes the COP28 all the more urgent. You see, the Paris Agreement was a landmark moment, but it did not list out specifics on what countries can do to achieve it. So at COP28, that's the very intention. The expectation is to have ambitious plans. Now, two major things are on the agenda. Fossil fuels are taking center stage. It is likely that nations will agree on a deal aimed at replacing fossil fuels with clean energy, like wind and solar power. The question is, will nations agree to phase out the fuels? If a political agreement does emerge, this would be the most important outcome of the COP28. The second focus will be the Loss and Damage Fund. Last year, rich countries who are responsible for the majority of climate change agreed to create a fund for the poor and vulnerable nations. Months were spent discussing how such a fund should work. A compromise blueprint was drawn up a few weeks ago, but one thing is still missing: the actual funds. The goal is to get the fund up and running by 2024. With time running out, COP28 is expected to lay down the framework. The decision will lie in the hands of world leaders. More than 160 member nations are attending COP28, including the UK, France, Germany, Japan and India. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be here, so will King Charles III, and even Pope Francis, the first pontiff to attend a COP. Leaders from major oil-producing countries will be here too, such as Saudi Arabia, Syria, Russia and Iran. So will fossil fuel executives, like the Wall Street heavyweight BlackRock CEO Larry Fink. But frankly speaking, the list is as much about who's attending as it is about who's missing it. US President Joe Biden and China's President Xi Jinping both will not come to Dubai. These are leaders of the world's top polluting countries, and they won't be present at the biggest climate summit, and that's hardly the only point of controversy right now. The summit is hosted at a different location each year. This year, the UAE is the host country, the world's fifth largest oil producer. Critics call this a conflict of interest. The other side says it's better to co-opt oil producers than villainize them. After all, the whole world uses the oil they produce. Some oil producers have in fact shown some serious commitments to mitigating the risks of climate change. So we can only hope that contentions do not undermine these negotiations and countries start making good on their plans to curb global warming. With COP28 coming up, the stage is practically set. Two weeks, 14 days, 336 hours and counting. That's how long 41 workers have been stuck in a tunnel in the Indian state of Uttarakhand. Every day some report mentions that they're coming out. There have been several attempts to get them out. Strategies have changed. Machines have broken down. But so far nothing has worked out. These men are still stuck under the collapsed tunnel and authorities are still racing against time to rescue them. So what is their next plan of action? And why is this mission proving to be so challenging? Our next report answers these questions and more.
The rescuers were just meters away. A few more hours and the 41 men would be free again. The spirits were up. They were racing to get them out. But the drilling machine hit a snag. It got damaged. So once again, after 2 weeks, we are back to square one. On November 12th, these 41 men were working on a tunnel. It was just another day at work, except it wasn't. The tunnel caved in, the men were stuck. And since then, it has been a race against time to get the 41 people out as soon as possible. But the operation has proved very challenging. There are a lot of obstacles. Loose debris, the presence of rocks and stones, and precarious terrain. They're all making the rescue operation difficult. Plus, there's the pressure knowing that these men have been stuck for 336 hours and counting.
The drilling, the augering, has stopped.
Yeah.
It's too much for the auger, okay?
Okay.
It's like our auger is it's not going to do anything more. We're looking at, as we've always been, multiple options, but with each option, we're considering how do we make sure that 41 men come home safe and we don't hurt anyone.
Authorities now are looking at multiple options. One of them is manual digging. Rescuers have already drilled through 34 meters. Only 12 meters were left when the machine broke. So they are digging by hand. This would help remove the debris.
We're breaking out the cut ahead. It'll be about another 2 hours, and then the intention is to do the next 9 meters by hand tunnel. And that's the situation at the moment.
The other operation happening simultaneously is vertical drilling. This isn't the best plan, but it is an option, and authorities are exploring it. They're trying to create an alternative route. However, this will take over 100 hours, which means even if it works, the 41 men will only be out in 4 to 5 days. However, vertical drilling is a huge risk. Vibrations from the machine could cause more debris to fall. Plus, it could destabilize the terrain. Then there's the fear of bad weather. There's forecast for rain, thunderstorms, hail, and lower temperatures. So the weather could play spoilsport. But authorities say work will continue for now. Which brings us to the 41 men. Authorities say they are in good spirits. They are being given oxygen and cooked food. They've been stuck for 14 days. They will be stuck for some more time. But for them and their families, it's an ordeal without an imminent end in sight.
Let's turn to Myanmar now. It's been exactly a month since fighting erupted there. rebel groups came together to launch an offensive against the military junta. 3 rebel groups joined hands to form what they call the Brotherhood Alliance. They began with a few skirmishes in the northeastern state of Shan, but over the past few weeks, the attacks have spread into multiple regions. The rebels have made rapid progress. They've overrun scores of military installations. At least 180 military installations, according to some reports. The rebel alliance has had massive tactical gains as well. And more groups have joined them along the way, like the Chin National Army. It has joined ranks with the rebel alliance. The military is now clearly on the back foot. Myanmar is facing a crisis, and this crisis has reached the borders of India and China. Let me show you what's happening in Myanmar's northwest. We're talking about the Chin state. Here, a town called Lai Len Pi has fallen to the rebels. The Myanmar army gave up their posts and fled. Now, Lai Len Pi is a small town, only a few kilometers away from India's eastern state of Mizoram, northeastern state of Mizoram. This is the second town near the Mizoram border to be captured by anti-junta rebels. The first one was taken almost 2 weeks ago. That's the border town of Rikhodar. It was also taken by the Chin National Army. Now, the fighting in the Chin state has caused a refugee crisis. India is taking in civilians fleeing the violence in Myanmar.
When I was there, they have so many problems, and the army, the military, we came to our village and just like go to one by one houses and knocking the doors and ask them to come out. Everybody, so some people are very scared and hiding inside the houses, even though they are breaking their door and let them to come out. In that time, it's very worse.
So New Delhi is taking a cautious and humanitarian approach, giving shelter to thousands of civilians. It's a neighborly act amid testing times. But India is also sending back the soldiers who cross the border. Reports say there are many such soldiers who have just fled when faced with the rebels. And this is not limited to the West. The Myanmar army is losing ground in the northeastern Shan state as well. The Brotherhood Alliance has made significant advances there. The Myanmar-China border gate in the town of Muse is now in the hands of rebels. Now, this is a major trading point between Myanmar and China. It is vital for the trade of goods and consumer items. And now the rebels control it. This border takeover was violent. Hundreds of trucks carrying food, clothes and goods were set ablaze. Ultimately, the Myanmar military lost control, raising alarm bells in China. Beijing has now begun live-fire military drills. This is on the Chinese side of the border with Myanmar's Shan state. The Chinese army is calling these drills real combat training. Clearly, the fighting in Myanmar has rattled Beijing because the last time China carried out live-fire drills near Myanmar was some 6 years ago in 2017. So for now, India has taken a humanitarian stance, but China is in combat mode. What about the generals of Myanmar? Reports say they've begun forced conscription. Civilians in the southern city of Yangon have stopped venturing out at night. There is panic in the streets that the military regime is grabbing young men off the streets and taking them away to work as porters for the army. The military junta has, of course, called these allegations baseless. They've also slowed and in some cases blocked mobile internet services. People found using satellite internet services are being prosecuted. These crackdowns come as the military regime continues to suffer losses in large numbers. But in this 1 month of fighting, it's the civilians who've suffered the most. According to the United Nations, more than 300,000 are homeless and displaced, 300,000 in just a month. Hundreds of thousands are caught in the crossfire, running short of food and water, and in the constant fear of losing their life. There seems to be no end to the fighting, and for some reason, there is no international hue and cry demanding a ceasefire. Myanmar is nobody's cause. Now let's turn our attention to New Zealand, where a different sort of war is being fought and being lost, a war against tobacco. New Zealand finally got a new government, a coalition led by the New Zealand National Party. They needed allies to govern, and one of those allies had a demand, a repeal of the country's novel smoking ban. And they've got what they wanted. The world's first generational smoking ban is being repealed. It was brought in by the last government and hailed as a game changer. Turns out the game is not going to change, and tobacco smoke will fill the air for years to come. Here's our report.
New Zealand has a smoking problem, or rather, it has a smoking problem once again. Last year, the country had made massive strides. It had come up with a way to end the menace of smoking once and for all with a generational smoking ban. Anyone born after 2008 would have never been able to legally buy a cigarette. The logic was every year the smoking age would increase. It was a revolutionary plan, so brilliant that it inspired a similar scheme in the UK. And back home, it was starting to show results. About 84,000 people had given up smoking in just the last 12 months. But despite all of this, the novelty, the effectiveness and the apparent success, New Zealand's smoking ban has now been scrapped. Most are horrified and criticism is pouring in. Critics say this is a backward move which will cost lives, and it will especially affect New Zealand's Maori community, which has a disproportionately high number of smokers. So what brought about this reversal? Politics, of course. Politics and a need for short-term funding. You see, New Zealand has been struggling to form a government. It was finalised last Friday, about 6 weeks after the election took place. The New Zealand National Party won the election, but didn't have enough seats to form the government. It was trying to form a coalition government with like-minded parties. It included the ACT New Zealand Party and the New Zealand First. Apparently, both these parties were insistent that the smoking ban be scrapped. So the hunger for power triumphed over long-term health concerns. But this wasn't the only reason.
Our government will rebuild the economy to ease the cost of living and to deliver tax relief and to increase the prosperity of all New Zealanders.
Yes, the new government is bringing in tax cuts. That means it will lose government revenue, and they need to look at other sources to bring in the money lost, which is why they targeted the smoking ban. Because the ban does cost money to implement. Under the ban, shops would have lost money. The number of shops legally allowed to sell cigarettes were going to get reduced too, from 6,000 to just 600 across New Zealand. So thousands of people would have been losing money, which is why the smoking ban scheme also gave them subsidies to help shopkeepers avoid massive losses. But after scrapping the ban, New Zealand's government gets to keep that money and the money it makes from taxes on cigarette sales. So it's a short-term bump to finances and enough to make up for the new tax cuts. But again, it's a short-term win. The smoking ban was going to become profitable over time. It would have saved New Zealand's health system about $800 million over the next 20 years. Not to mention the lives saved. Smoking is reportedly the leading cause of preventable deaths in New Zealand. The ban would have saved about 5,000 lives a year lost to smoking. But it's not to be. Tax cuts come first, and it seems like New Zealand's youngsters will be the ones ultimately paying the price.
Moving away from way down south to South Asia, let's look at what's happening in Bangladesh. India's eastern neighbour is facing political turmoil and it's being chastised by the West. The latest to add their 2 cents is the Human Rights Watch. They've accused the government in Dhaka of trying to quote-unquote eliminate competition. They say the ruling party, the Awami League, has arrested more than 10,000 people in the last 2 months, and this comes just ahead of Bangladesh's general election. The polls are scheduled for the 7th of January. The Human Rights Watch says the Awami League is trying to clear the field, even though they may not have any real opposition at the ballot box. Because the main opposition party, the BNP, or the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, has not registered for the upcoming polls yet. They're planning to boycott the election. The BNP says it's because they do not trust the process. They want the government led by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to step down. They want a caretaker government to oversee the upcoming election. But that won't be happening. Bangladesh did have a caretaker system a while ago, but it was scrapped in 2011 for being unconstitutional. The caretaker government then overstayed its mandate, so the system was scrapped. Since then, Dhaka has been conducting elections without a caretaker. But now the opposition parties want it back, and they refuse to participate in the election unless a caretaker is appointed. So they're boycotting, also taking to the streets. Bangladesh has seen a string of political protests over the last few months. Protests and general strikes called by the opposition. Many of them have turned violent. At least 16 people have been killed, including 2 police officers. Public property has been torched, and the general public has been suffering. This has been going on for months.
What will the poor people do during the strike? The poor depend on their daily income, which is rare during strike periods. We don't have savings to break for the bad time. I have been wandering since morning for work, but no luck. How will we survive? Every price is skyrocketing. How will we save our families? We are still trying to remain calm.
It's very normal to be afraid during such strikes and blockades, especially with these public buses being burnt. It seems we are deliberately facing risks by stepping out during these periods. But what else can we do?
Another such strike is currently taking place. It was called by the opposition yesterday, and they've been agitating all over the country since. Local reports say that vehicles have been torched all over Bangladesh again. The opposition parties have also been lashing out at Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and at India. A senior opposition leader has said that India has taken a stand against Bangladesh. How's that? By supporting the Sheikh Hasina government. Now, this is a baseless claim, but there are some in Bangladesh who are worried about very real interference, not by India, but by the United States of America. Bangladesh's Chief Election Commissioner spoke up today. He said, and I quote, "Other than a few exceptions, most countries are not truly sovereign. The way the US can command us, we can't do the same to them." He's lamenting American interference in the upcoming election. Washington has been very critical of the Bangladeshi government recently. In September, the US began imposing visa restrictions. This is for people it believes are undermining Bangladesh's election. The list is not public, but this is being seen as a pressure tactic. And it's something that Russia has now called out. Moscow says American interference in Bangladesh amounts to neo-colonialism. Washington denies this, of course, but it continues to apply pressure on Sheikh Hasina and her government. So will the American strategy succeed? Will it encourage more protests and violence in Bangladesh? And how will Dhaka respond to all of this? We'll find out in the weeks to come. America is facing a possible invasion. There's an exploding population of hard-to-eradicate wild pigs. They're on the verge of spilling over from Canada to the US. These wild pigs are known for their survival skills, which has earned them the badge of super pigs. And yes, the super pig is an actual threat. Among some of the most invasive species on the planet, they're an ecological train wreck. These wild pigs have been a nuisance for Canada. Their population is out of control, and they will soon make their way into the US, particularly the northern states of Minnesota, Montana, and North Dakota. American officials are rushing to stop these migrants, and a different kind of Bay of Pigs invasion threatens the US. Here's our report.
There is an exploding population of hard-to-eradicate pigs that's threatening to spill over from Canada into the US. These are no ordinary pigs. They are crossbreeds of the wild Eurasian boar. They're larger in size than normal pigs. They have a high fertility rates, earning them the tag of super pigs. But they've become a nuisance for Canadian officials. Pigs are not native to North America, and Canada's problem with these boars goes back a few decades. In the 1980s, the Canadian government encouraged farmers to raise wild pigs. But the demand for pigs collapsed in the early 2000s. The farmers became frustrated with raising the pigs and set them free. It turns out that pigs are great survivors of the Canadian winters. The furry animals have survived because they eat anything and everything, and the wild boars are notorious for damaging farms and crops. These pigs are known for spreading diseases, and they're fast at reproducing. Female pigs can have up to a dozen piglets every year, which is one of the main reasons why their population is booming. There were over 60,000 wild pig sightings in Canada last year. In Canada, these pigs are spotted roaming in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Aerial surveillance shows these pigs are now migrating south. They will soon enter the US states of Minnesota, North Dakota, and Montana. And American officials are scrambling to prevent the invasion. The population numbers of these super pigs is so massive that even hunting them will not help. According to experts, even if 65% of the super pig population is killed every year, their total population will still continue to rise. and the success rate for hunters is not high enough to make hunting a viable option. Experts say that the more the pigs are hunted, the smarter they become at hiding. Canadian officials believe the eradication of super pigs is no longer possible, but American officials are slightly more hopeful. They have a few tricks up their sleeve to keep the wild pigs away. They're betting on large-scale ground traps. Nets will be fired from helicopters to capture herds. This would be done by installing trackers on the pigs, so that they can be hurtled into areas where the traps are in place. Experts say that the only way to control the pigs is by thinking out of the box. Focus on controlling their movement so that these super pigs do not get a foothold in the US.
India's favourite season is here, the wedding season. In just about 3 weeks, between late November and mid-December, close to 4 million weddings are expected to be held in India. 4 million. That's business of over $50 billion within a month. Weddings are big money spinners. The biggest among them are destination weddings. But not when there is competition. Of late, India's rich and famous are being lured by foreign lands, and recently Prime Minister Modi brought this up. He said, "Is a foreign wedding necessary?" Our next report answers that and tells you more about the big fat Indian weddings.
There are few things Indians love as much as weddings. According to most dictionaries, weddings simply mean marriage ceremonies. And chances are these dictionaries haven't met Indians yet. Because in India, weddings are so much more. They're glitzy, extravagant celebrations. A modest wedding in India is an oxymoron. It hardly matters how meager a household's earnings are. No expense can be spared. Let's give you an idea. Spread across about 3 weeks between late November and mid-December, close to 4 million weddings are expected to be held in India. Collectively, they're likely to bring in $51 billion. That's a business of over $50 billion within a month, all thanks to weddings. Each year, Indians buy jewelry worth over $7 billion for weddings. They book hotel rooms worth $600 million and buy apparels worth over $1 billion. And this is no shock. Weddings are big money spinners. But the greatest among them are the big fat destination weddings. They scream grandeur and luxury. You see, India is quickly becoming the land of the rich and famous. With over 790,000 high net worth individuals and 161 among them billionaires. On top of this, the economy is flourishing and celebrities are endorsing huge weddings. This has amplified aspirations. All of this should have been good news for India, but of late, high-profile families have chartered flights, rented gondolas to ferry guests across Venice, or hired Michelin-starred chefs in Rome, and even shut down famous casinos in Monte Carlo for ceremonies. For the Indian elite, destination weddings on foreign lands are the big thing. According to reports in 2022, the big hits were Paris in France, Istanbul in Turkey, Tuscany and the Amalfi Coast, both in Italy. But this year, the itinerary includes Rome and Lake Como in Italy, Cancun in Mexico, and Budapest in Hungary. But this is not great news for the Indian wedding business. Average weddings cost anywhere from $3,000 to $120,000. Extravagant weddings cost about $1 million. But destination weddings can go from $1 billion to $5 million. With over $600,000 spent for a 2-day hotel booking for guests. Which is why India's Ministry of Tourism has launched a campaign to promote weddings in India. And now the Prime Minister too has brought up the topic. PM Narendra Modi asked, "Is a foreign wedding necessary?"
इन दिनों ये जो कुछ परिवारों में विदेशों में जाकर के शादी करने का जो एक नया ही वातावरण बनता जा रहा है, क्या ये जरूरी है क्या? भारत की मिट्टी में, भारत के लोगों के बीच अगर हम शादी ब्याह मनाएं, तो देश का पैसा देश में रहेगा. देश के लोगों को आपकी शादी में कुछ न कुछ सेवा करने का अवसर मिलेगा.
For many Indians, indeed, it isn't. In India, Rajasthan, Goa, Uttarakhand and Tamil Nadu remain a favourite for destination weddings. With picturesque mountains, serene beaches and historical palaces, India should be an obvious choice for destination weddings. So next time you want to copy a big Bollywood wedding, think Katrina instead of Deepika or Anushka.
And now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. In Italy, thousands rallied across the country calling for an end to violence against women. In Kosovo, snowfall seemed to puzzle an African lion as it abandoned its zoo enclosure for a heated room. And a museum dedicated to NBA great LeBron James has opened in his hometown in Ohio. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1895, Swedish dynamite millionaire Alfred Nobel signed his last will. In his will, Nobel specified that a bulk of his fortune would be set aside as a fund. The fund would be used for prizes to those who shall have conferred the greatest benefit to humankind. This led to the establishment of the Nobel Prize that we know today. We're leaving you with that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
think that is